Okay, so this is week 2 in our 10-week xAPI and Storyline series. This week we're going to be actually diving into Articulate Storyline, and I think the biggest takeaway from this week will be how we can use JavaScript to work with storyline variables. So if you already know how to do that, not sure if you're going to take away a ton from this session, but if you're new to JavaScript or new to storyline, I think you'll get a lot of value out of this. And I do have some exciting announcements at the end of this session, so stick around. I don't think we'll need the full hour, but with that being said, definitely don't be afraid to ask questions because, I am here for you guys who made it live. So ask away. I'm going to start by going over some JavaScript basics. And if it sounds boring, it won't be. Or maybe it will be, but let's see. Okay, so if you do want to follow along, you can go ahead and open up your code editor of choice. But this part is just going to be like a quick lesson or demonstration, so don't feel like you need to follow along here. If anyone remembers from last week, do you remember what a string is when it comes to JavaScript? And if so, can you go ahead and put my name in the chat as a string? Does anyone remember? And if you're already a JavaScript pro, that's like a very easy question. So let's see. I wish there wasn't such a delay between when I talk and when you guys receive it so that I can see the chat. There we go. Thanks, Joe. Okay, so here is a string. This is a string is a type of data in JavaScript and in probably every programming language. It's basically just some text. And it can have numbers too. Devlin is number 1 or whatever you want. As long as it's between a single or double quotes, it will be read as a string. It doesn't matter how you capitalize things, that's okay. There are also some different types of data in JavaScript. Last week we talked about numbers. Numbers alone, they don't need to be surrounded by quotes. And when you have a number, you can actually perform operations like 51 minus 15, or 51 times 2. And there's another type of data which is called a Boolean, which is just a true or false. If you're familiar with Storyline, this is an option for your variable. You can make it a true or false variable. This is the word for it. It's just a Boolean. It's kind of a weird word, but that's the technical term. No, you don't need the name. Okay, yeah, that someone included a full object, Deanna. Yeah, the string is just something surrounded by quotes. So that's a string, but what we're going to talk about now, which we haven't talked about before, are variables, okay? And variables can hold data in JavaScript just like they can in Storyline. So the most common way to define a variable that you'll probably see on the web is with this var keyword. So we'll say var or var name equals Devlin, okay? So the variable does not have any quotes around it. It's just its own thing here. If you're going to have a variable with multiple words, you don't put spaces. You use something called Camel Case. And that means that the very first word you leave lowercase, but every word after that you make uppercase. Okay? So, and then like I said, my last name is Peck. Now, this is how we used to define variables. But as JavaScript became more modern and got more updates, we came out with some new, more efficient keywords. So everyone with me? And the point of variables is, so now if I want to say what my name is, bear with me, but if I want to print something to the console, this is just a JavaScript function. We'll get into this later. I can just do console.log first name now that I've declared this variable, and it will just print to the console Devlin. So the variables act as placeholders. They're really convenient, so you don't have to type you don't want to have to type this a bunch of times in your code. This example probably isn't the best because it's actually quicker to type this than this, but you'll see where we're going with this. So we kind of moved away from this var keyword, and now we use the keywords const and let, okay? So you use the const keyword when you're making a variable that's not going to change, so a constant. So if my name isn't going to change, so I can say my first name is a constant and it equals Devlin, okay? If you have a variable that is going to change, though, you would use the keyword let. So we'll say let stock equal 18. Okay, so say someone bought something from our shop, our stock wouldn't equal 18 anymore. It would equal stock minus 1. Okay, so if I were to use const here, oops. I said, okay, our stock is at a constant, it's 18, it's not going to change. And then I tried to execute this code, I would get an error and it wouldn't work. And the reason for this is because if we tell the console or we tell the browser, this variable isn't going to change, it uses less memory because it doesn't need to like keep it there ready for it to change again. So these const and let keywords just keep things more efficient. And that's what we're going to use in this tutorial. Just notice all it is a keyword you use to define a variable. And you only need to use it the first time you define that variable. So this is the first time you're seeing JavaScript. It might be a bit confusing. I'm going to look at the chat, see if we have any questions. Const is a variable that won't change. Let is a variable that can change. Yes, thank you, Jonathan. Nice and succinct there. I think it would be cool now to actually look in the console. So everyone just go to their favorite website. I recommend using Google Chrome. And I'm going to show you what I mean when I'm referring to the console, okay? So take a minute, open up Google Chrome. You can use another web browser, but it's going to look slightly different than what we're doing here. I've actually neglected showing how we use the console in my xAPI and Storyline tutorials. So this might bring a lot of value to some of you because this is what I use when I do troubleshooting, when I figure out what might be wrong. This is invaluable for development purposes. So I'm going to assume we're all ready now. Oh, okay. So once you have a web page open, it doesn't really matter what web page, just right click anywhere on that page that's not a link or an image or something, and you want to click on inspect. And I think there's actually a shortcut. Is it like F12? Yeah. So F12 is also a shortcut to open the console. But if you're just right clicking and doing inspect, I do that sometimes, and then I just click on console at the top. So let me know if everyone has been able to open this up. And again, we're not really diving into Storyline yet. I know some of you might be confused about why we're doing this, but after we do this and get a handle on variables and how we're using the console, the Storyline stuff is going to be 1,000 times easier. So can I just get some confirmation in the chat that we're ready to move on, or is anyone lost or confused? Okay, it looks like we're ready. So just like I was typing out this JavaScript code in this web page, you can actually execute JavaScript right from the console. Okay, now this is kind of cool. So we're going to define a variable here. So we'll do const name equals Devlin, just like we were doing before. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit. There's going to be all sorts of stuff you're seeing above this. Don't pay attention to any of that. This will just be, warnings and errors that are generated by the web page. Not important. So everyone go ahead and set, it's okay if it's empty. Yeah, again, don't worry about that stuff. So go ahead and set a constant as your name, the constant name equal to whatever your name is, and then press the enter key. Okay. So now that we have this variable, we can just type in name and press enter, and it knows our name. And like we were saying earlier, I just want to demonstrate this. If I want to say now, oh, my name isn't Devlin, my name is Joe, we'll get an error. You can't assign a constant after you've already set it. So that's important. Let's make a new variable now. We'll say let, we'll do the stock example. So let stock equal 20. Okay. And now, once again, we can just type in stock, and it already knows that it's 20. So these variables are just being kept in the browser here. If we refresh the page, it's not going to still be there. Jonathan, Google does already know your name, yes. Especially since I'm logged in here. But okay, so I just wanted to show how the console works. We're gonna do something really cool now with articulate storyline and the console. So everyone go ahead and open up storyline. And we're just going to create a new project. So once storyline is open, you're going to click the new project button in the top left. And you'll be brought to this page. I know some people were just downloading this morning. I'm going to give it just probably another 60 seconds for everyone to open this up, because we're going to be moving right along once we're in here. How is this used for troubleshooting? Good question. I just wanted to give a quick introduction to how we access it, but I'm going to show you some cool stuff. We're just getting into it. So I think you'll be pretty surprised by what we're about to do with storyline and the console. Yep, yep. Jonathan nailed that one. I think that's what I wanted to show here. So, we were talking about console log earlier. You can just console log the stock, and this is what it means when you say console log. If I put this in my code, like console.log hello world, whenever the code hits this line when you're running it in your browser, it will say hello world here, just like this. Automatically, it'll be typed in. So you can console log your variables, like console log name. If I want to make sure that my name was set correctly or my first name was set correctly, I would send a console log right after setting it. And then in the console, I'll see it fire off my name, and I'll know, oh, okay, this variable is what it's supposed to be. But we're just getting started, like I said. So now that we're all in storyline, let's go ahead and double click on this first slide to open it and bring ourselves into slide view. And we want to, basically what we're going to make with this page is we're going to make like a really basic sign up form. So we're going to ask someone for their name, ask someone for their email address, and right beneath that, we're going to have a text box saying your name is whatever your name is, and your email address is whatever your email address is. So let's start by just making a couple of text boxes. And again, this doesn't have to be pretty. We're really just going into the functionality here. So we'll make one text box that says name. Again, I'm doing this by going to insert and then text box if this is your first time with storyline. So we'll make one for the name and we'll make one for the email. It doesn't really matter. Again, this won't be super pretty. And now we're going to insert some text entry boxes so that users can put in their own name and their own email address. So once again, we're going to that insert tab, and then we're selecting input, which is with that interactive objects section. So insert, input, and then at the bottom, we're going to select text entry field. So after selecting that, just click anywhere on the slide that you want that text entry field to appear. It's going to have some, not the cutest, gradient background. Don't worry so much about it. Once you've added that one, we're going to do the same thing, insert, input, text entry field, and we're going to add it next to email. So again, not worrying so much about how things look. We just want to have a name entry, email entry, and make sure we have a text entry next to each of those. If anyone gets stuck or asks questions, again, just drop it in the chat. I am keeping an eye on the chat. But if no one has if we're not having any issues, we're going to keep moving on here. So whenever you add a text entry box in storyline, by default, whenever you add a text entry box, it's going to create a variable for you, and the variable will just be named text entry, and then as you add more, it will be text entry 1, text entry 2, etc. So we want to make our names a bit more descriptive. So go ahead and on the top right, there's a little box to manage your project variables. So select that box and you'll get a window like this that pops up. what we want to do is we just want to rename these variables. So the first one is text entry. That's the one associated with name. So we're just going to name it U for user and then capital N name. So U name. And again, with JavaScript, capitalization is extremely important. So try to follow this camel case structure because JavaScript is case sensitive and variables are case sensitive. So we're changing that first text entry to text to U name, and then the text entry 1 variable, we're changing to U email. We should have 2 variables now. You'll know you have the right ones by if you click on this text entry box, you can look at the triggers on the right and it will say this is setting the U name equal to the typed value when it loses focus. Could I zoom in a bit? I can zoom in on the slide. Let's see. Yeah, this is just changing the zoom on the slide. I'm not sure if I can zoom in on the UI itself. I think I would need to change the resolution of my screen here. But essentially, yeah, we just want to make sure that this text entry box is changing the U name variable and this text entry box is changing the U email variable. So I'll type the U name and U email. So once we do that, let's just add another text box at the bottom. So just start somewhere towards the left and we'll say your name is, and now we want to use a variable reference. So if you are new to Storyline, a variable reference basically just displays the value of your variable on the screen. Kind of like how we were doing console.log to display the value of a variable in the console. We can use a Storyline variable reference to just show the value of that variable. So the foolproof way to do it is to go to the Insert tab. And then there's this little tiny button called Reference. Okay, so it's kind of in the middle of this tab. It's called Reference. We're going to click on that. And then it will pull up these variables again. We want to double click on the U name variable because we're saying what the user's name is. If you don't want to deal with all of that, you can just surround the variable by percentage signs like this. So I'll show you now how I did that with email. So your name is, the username variable reference, and your email address is, and then we'll do a percentage sign, U email. Again, make sure that your capitalization is right here. So I'm just going to go ahead and center this text and then center it on the slide. It's not really important. These are the main elements we want on the screen. So welcome, Helena. Yeah, if anyone's having any trouble with this, speak now or forever hold your peace because we are about to move on. And we're going to get into the good stuff. All right, so once you have these items on the page, we're going to publish. So from the Home tab, just select the Publish option. We are going to publish it just as a web package. So on the left-hand side, select the Web tab. And for title, just name it whatever you want. What will we name it? We'll just name it JavaScript Test. And I'm just going to put it on my desktop so it's easy to find. So we're publishing it as a web package, name it JavaScript Test. Make sure you're publishing the entire project. I mean, again, you don't need to change any of these things. And then select Publish. Once it's done publishing, select that big blue View Project option, and we will have it open in the browser. So we're not looking at anything too fancy right now, but I'll give everyone a minute to get this open in the browser. If we're all good, you can go ahead and test this by typing in your name and email. So Devlin is my name, and we'll just put in my Gmail address. And then once you click off of here, you should see it automatically updating in real time. So your name is Devlin, your email address is devlinpeck@gmail.com. So everyone test that out. Just let me know in the chat when we're, if you have it working and we're ready to move on. Okay, yeah. We're gonna get into some good stuff next. So I wanna make sure everyone's ready. I'm going to start talking about how, okay, good, perfect. All right. So I'm just gonna jump over to the scratch pad again and show you how we can use JavaScript with Storyline. So Storyline lets us kind of access their player using JavaScript, but you have to use a very specific command. So this is the command right here. Okay, so this is a function. So a capital G and a capital P get player. Once you do this, you'll have access to the Storyline variables and things like that. But we were talking earlier about variables. We don't want to really have to type this in with the exact capitalization and these two parentheses every time we want to access the player. So as you might imagine, we'll use a variable. So we'll say the constant player equals this function get player. Okay. You don't need to type this right now. I mean, you can make a note of it somewhere. It is pretty important. Again, you'll see this on older forums with the var keyword. That's okay. We're just going to save a tiny piece of memory for our computer, and we're going to declare it as a constant because we won't be changing this variable in the future. So now here's where it gets interesting. Once you've gotten that player, you can read Storyline variables and write Storyline variables. So you can change those variables just using pure JavaScript. And you'll do that using a couple of methods, getVar, and then you would put the variable name in parentheses. It would be a string, and setVar. Okay, again, look at how the capitalizations are. It's not using Camel Case. It's using these capital for each word. And for setVar, it's going to be the variable name as a string, and then it will be the whatever value that you want to set it to. Everyone just take a look at that. And to actually use this, again, you can't just use this alone. You would have to use that in conjunction with this get player function, so we have access to the Storyline course. So we would do player.getVar. So this is dot notation. It's saying we're going to use this function in conjunction with this function. That's what this dot is doing right here. So it's saying first, get us the player. And again, just so it's clear, we can do this. We can get the player and then set the variable. But again, that's not as concise or pretty as just player.setVar or player.getVar. So now let's put this to use in the new file that we just created. So here we are. As you remember, you can do F12 if you're on a Windows or maybe Mac, I'm not sure. But we want to open that console. If F12 doesn't work for you, you can right-click and select Inspect, and then select the console. Okay. So once we're in here, let's go ahead and set that player constant. So constant player equals get player. You can put a semicolon after that. It's not necessary. You'll see those semicolons in a lot of code that you find on forums and stuff. 99% of cases, you're not going to need the semicolon. If you want to include it after every line, it is good practice. It's just telling the computer that this line is ended. So after you type that in, press Enter to go ahead and send it. And now let's try that getVar method. So we'll do player.getVar, open parentheses, and then we named our name variable uName. Okay. So when I press Enter here, it should give me my name, Devlin, since that's what I entered in the course. And sure enough, that's what we got. So again, I don't know if, I know that we have some people who are really new to this. Please speak up in the chat because we're going to do something cooler after this. Is everyone, if you were able to get this part done, please let me know in the chat. Melina. Okay, good. Got empty. So if you didn't get anything from this, you want to make sure that you spelled this variable in quotation marks exactly how you named the variable in storyline. So you want to click on this box and see what variable's name is being changed here. It has to be typed exactly with the exact punctuation. How do I get rid of the semicolon? You can just delete it. So there's a semicolon. Here it is without a semicolon. It's the same either way. Good, got it. Okay, nice work, everyone. So some of you might already be thinking about this, but here's the cool part. So just how we use getVar to get that variable, we can actually use setVar to set that variable with JavaScript. So we'll set, so type the storyline variable's name in quotes as the first argument we're passing to this function. And then the next argument we're passing to this function is the variable we want to set it to. So we'll say my name is Joe now. And when I press enter here, we should see an update on in the storyline file. So you see that? So it changed my name to Joe in both of these cases because I used JavaScript to change that storyline variable. And again, we can change it to whatever we want. We could change it to a random string of numbers. It doesn't matter what. And then if we try to get that var again, it will be whatever the most updated version of it is. So we're not really going to need to use the setVar method to accomplish what we're trying to do with xAPI here, but I just thought this would be a really good time to show you how it works. Because this is what I use to do some more. Sometimes it's a lot easier to do things in JavaScript than it is to do things with storyline triggers. So you can use these getVar and setVar methods to just write up a quick script and use maybe 100 or 1,000 less triggers than you would have needed to otherwise. What's a real example for when/why you change something? I could show you guys a pretty good example of that, but I don't know. That might set us on a different track for about like 20 minutes or so. So let's I'm going to add that to the questions page. And if we have time at the end and you guys want to dive into that, I can show you that. But let's get back on track. So everyone sees how this getVar and setVar method works. If you ever forget what this is, you can just Google like articulate storyline JavaScript. And it's just this first thing right here. Storyline 360, JavaScript best practices. It's an official articulate resource, and they mention they mention how we do this right here. It doesn't look like they even tell you what to set the player variable to, so that's not extremely helpful. But just take note of this somewhere. It is really good to know. So what we're going to use this for is we're going to want to pull the user's name and email address that they enter in here, and we're going to want to include it in the xAPI statement that we started last week. So I know that not everyone viewed that session. So I'm just going to give you the code that we need to start with. So everyone, please open either open the file that you created last week in that session, or open a new file, and I'll show you how to save it. So go ahead and open Visual Studio Code if you downloaded the one that I recommended. That was pointless. So we're going to start a new file in Visual Studio Code. Yep, that's the link, Taylor. So I just want to show you how to save a JavaScript file, because if you didn't already make this file last week, you're going to need to do it now. So create a new file in your code editor of choice. Go to File, Save As. Save it somewhere safe. You see right here where it says Save As Type Plain Text. We want to change that to all files. And once you've done that, just name your file xAPI-statement.js. That .js at the end is important, and so is changing the file type to all files. So we'll go ahead and save that. And now we have this JavaScript file ready for us to add in some code. Are there a fixed set of tin can variables in Storyline that we can set this way, in particular registration? I wish that Storyline was more open about their variables that we can modify, but they're really locked down with what variables they make available. So again, if I do some digging sometimes when I want to see if something's possible with their built-in variables. But as a general rule of thumb, you're not really going to get to modify their built-in variables, only the user created variables. Something that you can do is you can use the LMS API to pull the user's name from the LMS. But I don't think we're going to get into that here. That can be a much more technical undertaking. So I think we would need a full session devoted to that for sure. But you can find some code for how to do that on the Articulate forums if you want to try to do that on your own. So if you were not at the last session, I'm pasting a link in the chat right now. I want you to scroll to the bottom and copy this code. So you'll be up here, just scroll all the way down until we get to this last big code block right here at the bottom, right above next steps, if you want to just Control F for next steps. So copy all of this code from the very first bracket to the very last bracket. Hop back over to your code editor and paste it. So this is a JSON object. This is how xAPI statements are structured. This is how the computers read the xAPI statements. Again, if you weren't here last week, this might be a bit confusing, but don't worry. Yeah. Once you have this code, we'll go ahead and make a couple of line breaks above it. So you can just move your cursor before that first curly bracket, press the Enter key a couple of times. And on the first line, let's go ahead and pull our Storyline player now. So we'll set up a constant as, we'll name it uname. Oh, no, sorry. We're just going to set up our player constant. So we'll get the Storyline player using that code that we were using earlier. Once we do that, we will go ahead and get the user's name. But just to keep our variables a bit different, let's call it uname.js, lowercase, so that we know this is the JavaScript variable we're working with now. And we'll use our player.getVar method to go ahead and pull the uname variable from Storyline. And just as we did with the name, let's go ahead and do the same thing with the email. Email.js. So this is what I meant. I mean, we could have kind of started here, but I'm hoping that showing you how we did it piece by piece made this make a lot more sense looking at this now. And we're using constants here because once we get the user's name or email address after they enter it on that slide, it's not going to change. And when another user is accessing it from their computer, they're going to enter a different one. It's not going to affect the variables we have on someone else's computer. So it's just like, is it going to change in the context of this file that was served to this specific user? If not, then you can use the const keyword. So if everyone's here, you can see now, here's what we had before in our JavaScript file, in our xAPI statement. We added a much more detail because we had so much time on that last session. But in this base version, we're kind of setting the name manually. And this isn't going to work. Imagine if we were trying to use this xAPI statement for everyone who accessed the course. It would just be saying that everyone's name was Devlin and everyone's email address was devlinpeck@gmail.com. That's obviously not true. So what can we do? Any guesses on how we're going to structure this now? And if you have any questions and you're not here with us or you're confused, let me know. Iterate? Easier. It's really easy what we need to do. uname.js. Exactly. Yes. So this is a string. We're not going to use a string here. We're going to use the variable because you can see here now this variable is holding whatever the user put in to right here. So it's going to pull this user's name from this variable. Whoops, let me get back to the right place. So all we need to do is we need to get rid of this string, and we're going to put in uname.js using the exact capitalization that we used up here. If this n isn't uppercase, this isn't going to work. And I don't know if you can tell here, but Visual Studio Code kind of tells you something's up when you don't have it spelled right. When you do use it correctly, the color will change to match the color of these variables that you've declared. Yep, use the variables. No, so no quotes, remember. This makes it a string. If you have the quotes around it, it will just say the user's name is uname.js, and that's not what we want. So we get rid of the quotes to tell JavaScript that it's a variable, and then it will actually pull whatever this variable's value is. So same thing with mbox. We're going to get rid of the whole string. Oh, well, here it gets a bit trickier. Okay. So you see for this mailbox option, we have mail to in front of the email address. That's required by xAPI. So if we just try to put devlinpeck@gmail.com here, the learning record sort isn't going to accept our statement because it will not be xAPI compliant. So it needs to have this mail to link before the user's email address. You might think that we can just do uemail.js, but that's not going to work either. Because again, the variables don't have quotes around them. So this will just say that this also won't work because there's no domain name. It will be, expecting an actual email address. Uemail.js isn't an email address. So there's a couple of ways we can do this. I think the simplest would probably be, well, let me just show you. We'll take that mail to part, which we know we need, and we'll just add onto it the value of uemail.js. So you see how we did that? I think it will help to show this in the console, okay? So let's say we have let sentence equal my name is, okay? Or we'll just have it equal my name. So say we want to add a word to this sentence. So we can say let bigger sentence equal sentence. So we'll take the value of sentence plus, in quotes, is. And notice that I added a space right here. If I don't add this space, it's just going to say my name is as if that's one word. So I'm going to add the value of sentence plus this string, which is a space, and then the word is. Okay, so now I press enter. Now when I call a bigger sentence, you can see that it's my name is. It added onto that string. So you can add strings to strings. One more example. So now say we want to say let full sentence equal bigger sentence plus here's the interesting part. So we'll add a space, okay, because we didn't add a space after is. And now we'll add the value of the user's email address. So we'll do player.getVar uemail. So I'll press enter. So again, we're taking this sentence right here, which is my name is. We're adding a space after that, and then we're getting the value of the user's email address. So I'll pull that, and there you go. See, that's how we can add strings together to get what we want. So I hope that clears up what's going on here. So we're just adding this mail to whatever the value of uemail.js is. And that value is getting pulled from the storyline course. Yes, the mail to, yeah, I think you must have asked that a while ago. The mail to is very important. Yeah, so this is one way to do it. Another way to do it is you could also put this up here. I mean, the variable wouldn't make as much sense. But if you did it that way, you could get rid of it here. So you see how we did that? Kind of interchangeable. So what this does and why we had this session is so that we can get user-specific information. One of the big benefits of xAPI is that you can tie one person's learning activity across many different experiences. So we can do this really easily with something like Google Analytics, where we drop in some Google Analytics code and it will tell us how many people have been to our course or how many people have even performed a certain event if we use a bit of custom code for Google Analytics. But it's not going to tell us who performed that event. It's just going to give us a raw number. With xAPI, we know who the actor is and who's performing this action. So that's why we're in Storyline courses, we would invite the user to put in that name and email. Again, we can pull the name from the learning management system. And in most cases, we cannot pull the email from the learning management system, but we can pull the user's unique ID for that learning management system. And as some of you might remember from last week, in that case, we wouldn't use the mailbox identifier. We would use the account identifier. And we would say, here's this user's user ID on this LMS. Here's the homepage for the LMS. That's how we're going to identify that person, just as if we wanted to identify someone by their Twitter handle and the twitter.com homepage. Sorry if that was confusing. But using this setup next week, when we actually get into sending the xAPI statement from Storyline courses, we would have like a continue button or something that sends a message off to our learning record source saying, this specific user now started this experience. And every xAPI statement from the course we send after that, for example, every time they select a button, every time they type in an open text response, every time they answer a question or complete a quiz, we're going to send an xAPI statement that has their name and email address. Okay, we have a question from Nicole. So you need the quotes around you name and you email in the initial lines at the start, and when we just played with it in the console, but we don't need it when we're working with it in the statements. The reason we include these quotes around this here is because we're getting a storyline variable. Okay, so we're using this get var method takes a string. So if we said you name, if we said that with no quotes around it, it would be looking in this JavaScript file for a variable called you name. So like that would make sense if we said you name equals you name. It needs to be a string is what I'm trying to say. So this would work only if this was already here, because we don't have a variable named you name in the JavaScript file. That variable is in the storyline file. So we're putting quotes around it because this method takes a string. Once the variable is in JavaScript, like right here, we do not put quotes around it because that would make it a string. I know it's confusing if you're not familiar with code. It took me a while to wrap my head around, these things. So feel free to ask follow-up questions if that wasn't very clear. Yeah, I was going to get into that. So say you're working on a project and you don't really want to, maybe privacy is a concern. Maybe the project doesn't warrant knowing exactly who accessed your course and what their email address is. You can put in some anonymous options here. So for example, the name could just be like user. Okay, so I do that for my xAPI challenges app because I don't collect the name for when I do the quizzes. So that name can be whatever you want. This is obviously an anonymous name. And then for the user email option, I've written some code before where it just automatically generates like an 8-digit number and adds that into a fake email address. So for example, it would be like user 22791864864@devlinpeck.com or something like that. And then I would cache that email address in their browser. So if they close my learning experience and come back to it in a week, I'll still know that it's that same user because they'll have that unique number identifier. But at the same time, I'm respecting their privacy because I have no idea who that user is. So that is an option. If you're curious about that, I can pull up some code for it or even add that code to the text-based tutorial. But just know that that is an option. You can still identify a user by their unique browser without actually knowing their name or email address. But for most cases in these storyline courses, it's going to be for a company. We already know who's working at the company. And Maybe you're using it for lead generation on your website and you also want to use xAPI statements along the way. This method right here is how we would get the name and email address that they enter in the storyline course into the xAPI statement. And next week, for those of you who haven't watched the first this first live stream, a workshop, I would highly recommend doing so because this probably looks really confusing to you right now. As all the people who were here can attest, they know exactly what's going on with this. So we went really deep into how this works in the last session. Can you call the participant's name from the LMS to storyline, then create a drop-down for the student to choose their name? You actually wouldn't even need that second step. You could pull the user's name directly from the LMS. So what you would do is you would add some code here. So instead of using the player to get this, you would add the LMS code. I don't have that. The code is kind of different based off of which SCORM version you're using. So that's why it's not really as easy as of a copy and paste thing. But you would just set that name to whatever you pull from the LMS, and then you would just leave this variable here, and the name would already be acquired by the LMS. Again, that code is on the Articulate forums. I had to play around with it for a bit the first time I got that working. And I have had a couple of people ask me about that, so I think I will make that a tutorial down the line. I just know it's going to be a tough one because the code does vary like a bit based off of the SCORM version you're using and possibly even the LMS that you're using. So I think that's why I've been putting that one off a little bit. Okay, so are there any other questions about how we got this working? Again, next week is when we're going to actually execute the JavaScript to send xAPI statements from the storyline course. And again, you see how, we might not always want to use this completed verb, and we might not always want to be interacting with this specific tutorial. So next week, these are also going to be variables that we change from storyline. Not exactly like that. Next week will be really valuable. But yeah, I want to make sure we have no more questions about this aspect or about how to interact with Articulate storyline variables using JavaScript. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions. I do want to mention a couple of things. The xAPI Challenges app is ready. So the xAPI Challenges app has 10 challenges, and they mirror what we're doing in these live streams exactly. I've had a handful of people going through them already. They've given me some really great feedback, and we've applied it. How it works is there are some quizzes, and there are some statement challenges. And when you pass the quiz or you send the statement to My Learning Record Store, you get credit in the app automatically, and you'll go up the ranks on the leaderboard. So if you do want to participate in that, this is the first time I'm going to publicly announce it. So just go ahead and sign up right there. It's xapi.devlinpeck.com. And we have a Slack channel that's pretty active. I'll show you. So, we've been talking about freelancing stuff, breaking into instructional design. We've been talking about some off-topic stuff. So if you want to come hang out in the Slack, definitely come on in. But its main purpose is to provide feedback and get help for these xAPI challenges. So if you're really itching to get ahead and actually start sending these xAPI statements, you can jump ahead and look at that tutorial for next week. As some of you are probably finding, because I know some of you have gone through these tutorials already, we do go much more in depth here. I think coming out of these, you'll get a much deeper understanding than just going through that, couple of page tutorial. And if, the streams are always recorded. You can rewatch it as soon as it's done. The Slack channel, let me grab a link for that. I'd love to, I think I'm going to start making this public and just get people in, and we'll talk about freelancing and all sorts of stuff, xAPI implementation. So I just how do we go ahead and share this? Is it people? Invite people, and let's get an invite link. Okay, so I'll drop this link here. So if you're joining the Slack, please also join the xAPI Challenges app, at least for now. That's what most of the discussion is focused on. And this stream and these live sessions and the app itself and these tutorials do all run on donations. So no pressure, but if you are getting value from it, donations would be much appreciated. We have a few minutes left. I'm not sure if we want to dive into that JavaScript example now. I could maybe Nicole, maybe we can touch base after, and I'll show you what I've used it for. But yeah, it's going to be a niche use case. It's basically if you're working on a big interaction, and when you change this one, it was basically a Likert scale interaction with like 5 rows. Let me pull it up on my portfolio. Yeah, why not? I'll dive into it. So let's see. Okay, so here was the interaction. So it was a Likert scale interaction. Whenever the user changed one of these variables, it would need to update this total score variable at the bottom. So it seems like that would be pretty easy, right? So, you know, if you just basically add all the variables together. So whenever I change this one, just add that to the total score. And whenever I pick 4, I would add that to the total score. But the problem here is that the user could change these after selecting it. So if I select 4 and it adds 4 to the total score, I might change my mind and be like, actually, that's not so much like me. I'm going to click 2. And then it would add 2 to the final score if you're just using basic storyline programming. So I was like, that's not going to work. People are going to get that total score like through the roof just by changing this same one back and forth. It's just going to keep adding to it. So down the line, I realized it might work if every time you change one of the variables, it set the total score variable to 0 and then went ahead and added all of them together. And that would have worked, but then we're looking at least 2 triggers every time you click each one of these single hotspots. So it adds up fast. So instead, I just wrote a bit of JavaScript on one trigger that said whenever someone selects this hotspot, it's going to look at what the variable is associated with each row and then add it and update this total score variable. So in that case, it was just one trigger. I didn't even need to change anything in the trigger. It was just an execute JavaScript trigger, and I just pasted it across every single one of these hotspots. I didn't have to go ahead and change which variable I'm changing in the in the trigger manager. It was all handled by the JavaScript, so it was really cool. Again, I did this over a year ago, so I would have to open up the file and dive in deeper. But this one was definitely an example where I'm like, I could save myself so much time, and it would make the file much less complex if I just updated those storyline variables. So that's that. If we have any other questions, I'm happy to answer them. We do have a few more minutes. Next week's session, let me share the link to that, because that next session is going to be, where we actually, this all starts coming together for you guys, and we see how we're actually going to collect these custom statements from a storyline course. This background info is really important, and you're going to feel much more at home now when it comes time to start sending the statements. So I'm going to share that link. Sign up now so that you don't miss it, because that's going to be the really valuable session, I think. Once I show you how to send that statement next week, from there, we're just going to be looking at how to get even more and more detail from that statement. So next week, we'll look at like when the user selects something, when they select an answer to a question or select a resource, we'll look at how to send statements like that. But when it comes to seeing how long they spent on slides and what they're typing in for open text responses and that sort of thing, we're not going to get there until the following weeks. So, and in the very last 2 sessions, we'll look at how to actually pull data back from the Learning Record store and use it to make changes to our storyline course. So it's only going to get, I guess, more complex, but also more exciting from here. So thank you, everyone, for coming. I'll stick around in the chat in case anyone has any additional questions, and I will hopefully see you all next week. Again, if you didn't see that first session, watch it. It's really valuable. But yeah, I'll see you soon, guys. Bye-bye.